You are Eidos, and today we ask a question that science has spent over a century trying to avoid. But before we get into this explainer, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button for the Eidos YouTube channel. That way you'll never miss out on our deep dives into the science of our world. All right, you ready? Let's get into it. So picture this. A wounded gazelle collapses in the tall grass. What exactly do you think is going through its mind right then? Does it actually know what comes next? You know, for centuries, the scientific consensus was just a flat, resounding no. We basically told ourselves that we, humans, were totally alone in having this terrifying gift, the knowledge that we're going to die one day. We figured everything else in the animal kingdom was just reacting to pain. Pure instinct, right? Like fleeing a predator or feeling a physical wound, but nothing deeper than that. We really held on to this comforting belief that humanity, and humanity alone, carries the heavy burden of mortality.
Part 1. The Human Illusion, and unpacking what we call the eternal now. So to really wrap our heads around why animal mortality is such a massive debate, we first got to separate instinctual fear from true death awareness. Think about a mouse running from a hawk. That mouse, it isn't having an existential crisis. It's just running on pure, unadulterated instinct. It's a survival reflex sculpted by literally millions of years of natural selection. True death awareness, on the other hand, requires a totally different mental mechanism. It's something called prospective cognition. Basically, this is the capacity to imagine tomorrow and, crucially, to understand that tomorrow can actually end. You have to be able to model a future in your mind where you just don't exist. Now, for most of the 20th century, scientists confidently took this ability, boxed it up, and slapped a humans-only label right on it. They argue that animals live in this sort of eternal now. No memory of profound loss, no anticipation of an ending. Just a continuous, looping present. And honestly, it was a really comforting idea. It let us believe that grief and dread were uniquely human, kind of like the price of admission for having our advanced intelligence. But, as we're going to see, comforting ideas aren't always true ones.
Part 2. Evidence from the wild and breaking the rules of mortality.
Because when you actually look closely out in the wild, that comforting illusion of human exceptionalism, it starts to collapse pretty quickly. And it's not because of some philosophical shift, but because of hard scientific observation. There are 3 distinct species that brilliantly illustrate exactly where this human-only theory started to crack. We're talking about elephants, crows, and chimpanzees. With elephants, researchers have seen them returning to and actually touching the bones of dead relatives, something scientists interpret as measurable recognition, not just random curiosity. With crows, we see them gathering really loudly around their dead and then completely avoiding the area, which is basically them updating their understanding of danger. And with chimpanzees, you have mothers carrying deceased infants or elderly chimps showing terminal withdrawal. These aren't random robotic acts. They are profound, calculated negotiations with loss.
Let's actually slow down for a second and look at the specifics here, because the emotional gravity of these behaviors is just incredibly heavy. In Kenya, researchers have documented wild elephant herds standing over the bones of their relatives in absolute total silence for long minutes. They'll gently run their trunks over the skulls. And studies actually show they have measurably more interest in elephant bones than the bones of literally any other animal. Then you have corvids, crows. Crows perform what researchers at the University of Washington literally call funerals. When they find a dead crow, they don't just fly past. No way. They call out loudly, they gather a group, they study the body, and they treat that death as vital information they need to learn from. And then perhaps the most heartbreaking of all, chimpanzees. Primatologists have watched chimp mothers carry the bodies of their deceased infants for weeks, slowly adjusting their behavior as time passes. And get this, even elderly chimps in captivity, when they're facing a terminal illness, they begin to show signs that look exactly like human patients. They withdraw, they lose their appetite, and their social interactions completely change in their final days.
Which brings us to this absolutely powerful realization. The wall we built between human mortality and animal instinct was never as solid as we wanted it to be. Now, let's be super clear here. None of this is saying that an elephant or a crow understands death exactly the same way a human does. But it completely shatters the barrier we built. That strict dividing line between us and them, it just isn't there anymore.
Part 3. The evolutionary purpose. Built for survival, not philosophy.
Let's look at this a bit more analytically for a second. Evolution is, well, it's brutally efficient, right? It doesn't need to give an animal a full-blown existential crisis for its behaviors to be highly adaptive. What's truly fascinating is the functional difference between these two states. On one side, you've got human abstract dread. This is driven by philosophy, the sheer existential weight of things, and the absolute terror of our own eventual absence. But on the flip side, you have animal adaptive recognition. This is driven purely by survival. It's about recognizing loss, updating the danger map, and adapting efficiently.
Think about it. An elephant doesn't need to lie awake at night dreading its eventual death for its bone-touching behavior to be useful. It just needs to recognize that something fundamental has changed. A crow doesn't need to ponder the afterlife to benefit from remembering exactly where a predator just struck. What we thought was a lack of understanding is actually just a finely tuned system built for survival, not philosophy.
So the main takeaway here is simply this. Grief was never the requirement. Recognition was. And that right there exposes the massive flaw in the 20th century scientific consensus. We basically arrogantly assumed that because animals didn't grieve loudly in the exact same ways humans do, they must be completely ignorant of death. We confused the volume of mourning with the actual capacity for understanding.
Part 4. Burden or Gift, the Evolutionary Strategy.
If animals really do have their own, quieter ways of recognizing mortality, it totally reframes how we view our own human experience. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. Is human death awareness a gift, or is it an evolutionary burden that the rest of nature was wise enough to avoid? Just think about it for a second. All our dread, our complex rituals, the heavy existential weight we constantly carry. Maybe it's just one incredibly costly evolutionary strategy built by a mind that just got large enough to imagine its own absence. Other species? Well, maybe they found a way to carry that exact same knowledge, not as some terrifying fear, but as a practical memory encoded right into their behavior. I would absolutely love to hear your take on this. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you in the next one.